Tucker Carlson interviewed Masoud Pezeshkian of Iran. Now, Iran is coming off a U.S.-Israeli-backed attack, one that killed nearly 1,000 Iranians. There was a bombing of Iran's nuclear sites. Operation True Promise 3 landed heavy blows to Israel and forced Israel to beg for a ceasefire. Now, this is often viewed as an Israel-Iran war, but of course, the United States is deep at the heart of it. And as this interview was released, Donald Trump was meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House, and reports indicate that Trump will greenlight future attacks on Iran by Israel. But let us react to this interview. It's going to be played on 1.5 speed. Here we go.
There is a pause, or seems to be a pause, in the war between the United States and Iran. How do you think this will end? How would you like to see it end?
We did not start this war, and we do not want this war to continue in any way. From the very beginning, it was the motto of my administration that I always adhere to, and that was fostering the national unity inside the country and also fostering peace and tranquility and friendship with the neighboring countries and with the rest of the world.
The American President Donald Trump has said that the United States bombed your enrichment facilities because the government of Iran refused to give up its nuclear program, and that there can be no peace until Iran does give up that nuclear program. Would you be willing to give up the nuclear program in exchange for peace?
I would like to tell you what has happened, and it was Netanyahu since 1984 has created this false mentality that Iran seeks a nuclear bomb, and it has insinuated that Iran is trying to develop a nuclear bomb.
I understand the framing here from President Pezeshkian, but it wasn't just Netanyahu. Netanyahu indeed has repeatedly, 1984 and onward, said that Iran is weeks away from a nuclear weapon, a week away, days away. But the United States has been doing this too. It's important. I understand that Pezeshkian and Iran want to negotiate with the United States, especially around sanctions alleviation. So I understand the circumstances. But at the same time, it must be noted that to just claim Israel is maybe not the full picture here.
The past, and it has put it in the minds of every U.S. president since then, and to make them believe that we would like to have a nuclear bomb. But the truth is that we have never been after developing a nuclear bomb, not in the past, not presently, or in the future, because this is wrong, and this is in contrast to the religious decree or the fatwa, which has been issued by His Eminence, the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, that so it is religiously forbidden for us to go after a nuclear bomb. And this was always corroborated thanks to our cooperation with IAEA, because they were always there that to verify this and to substantiate that we have never wanted a nuclear bomb. But unfortunately, this cooperation was disturbed by the unlawful attacks against our nuclear facilities.
And I want to add to this too, everybody, that when we're looking at when we're talking about these nuclear attacks, we are not just talking about Israel disrupting the negotiations because the Israeli regime wanted to undermine the United States and Iran's talks. No, we are talking about Donald Trump, literally the administration and Israel collaborating together to use negotiations to lull Iran into a kind of maybe sleepwalk, so that it wasn't aware of this coming attack, that this attack was being planned by Israel with the US's green light and, of course, coordination, because Israel doesn't do anything without the United States outside of its own so-called borders. But really, it doesn't do anything without the United States knowing, understanding, and really approving. And we have proof of this now, that the United States was using negotiations in this way. So again, Pezeshkian is looking at this through the prism of Israel disrupting U.S.-Iran talks, because Iran does have plans to reduce and get rid of these sanctions. This is very important, and this is very understandable. But of course, we here have to talk about the full picture. So let's continue.
So you have, according to news reports, withdrawn your cooperation from IAEA, the International Nuclear Regulatory Agency. And so I suppose, no way for the rest of the world to know how much uranium you're enriching and to what extent, to what percentage is being enriched. And so is there any way to verify, and would you be willing to allow other nations to verify that you are not building nuclear weapons?
Mr. Carlson, sir, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we were right in the middle of holding talks with the United States. And the President of the United States invited us to hold such talks in order to have peace. And we were told during the process of these negotiations and talks that as long as we don't give the permission to Israel, they are not going to attack you. And we were going to have the next round of the talks very soon, but in the middle of it, suddenly Israel torpedoed the negotiating table. We were sitting at the negotiating table when it happened, and by doing this, they totally ruined and destroyed diplomacy. In order to answer your question with regards to the surveillance or the supervision over our nuclear program, I would like to say that we are ready to hold talks over it. We have never been the party that has run away from verification. We stand ready to have these supervisions, but unfortunately, as a result of the United States unlawful attacks against our nuclear centers and installations, many of the pieces of equipment and the facilities there have been severely damaged. Therefore, we don't have any access to them. We cannot see, and unless this access is going to be back there again, we have to wait for it and to see what happens and how much they have been damaged so that we can go for the supervision.
So that was actually quite significant in many ways, right? Pezeshkian basically admitted there that Iran's facilities have been significantly damaged, so much so that access is difficult to get to understand what the extent is, how long does it delay the production of this enriched uranium. But Iran, what Pezeshkian didn't say here was that Iran actually had evacuated all of its enriched uranium days, maybe even weeks before even the Israeli attack happened. So this was predicted. It was known that there was going to be attack on Iran. It's probably known inside of Iran's government that there would be, in military apparatus, that there would be many attacks coming on it. So it prepared the way to ensure that its enriched uranium is protected. But it has, Pezeshkian here is admitting that the facilities are damaged. At the same time, though, it's still important to note that Iran's cooperation with the IAEA has been suspended completely, and for good reason. And here, what Iran's president Masoud Pezeshkian is doing is saying, well, we have been good faith parties to all kinds of nuclear inspections, and it's Israel, particularly citing Israel, that has undermined nuclear talks. And while this is factual on the face of it, we still have to emphasize that the United States and Israel are collaborating together to ensure that this nuclear pretext not only is the main and primary force for a regime change operation against Iran. And Pezeshkian's existence here, remind you, President Masoud Pezeshkian's presence here in this interview is a testament to the fact that Iran defeated this iteration of a regime change attempt against Iran. But it also has to be stated that this attack on Iran, the nuclear pretext is just that. It's a pretext. So Iran will, of course, do everything it has to do and everything it does by the book of international law up until a point when its sovereignty was violated. Now there cannot be the same kind of cooperation. We know that the Israeli regime sent in its own spy network into the IAEA to gather data, and the IAEA was not only not protected, but it was collaborating and ensuring that this kind of infiltration could occur. So really what we're looking at is a completely muddled, destroyed, decimated kind of world, or there is no nuclear inspection organization. It is truly a U.S. and Israeli tool for regime change, particularly against Iran, because to be quite honest, we don't see these inspectors doing anything when it comes to the U.S., the Israeli regime. I mean, these countries not only have nuclear weapons, but the U.S. is the only one to have used them. In Israel, let's be quite honest, Israel just from a moral and international law perspective, has absolutely no business owning nuclear weapons itself, given the dangerousness of its regime to not only Palestine, but the entire world.
You believe, your government believes, that the IAEA was spying on the government of Iran and passing information to Israel. Do you believe that? And if so, do you have evidence that that's true that the world could see?
I would like to tell you that we were, yes, somehow pessimistic about the activities of the IAEA, because somehow we realized that Israel could get information from the inspections which were carried out by the IAEA, but it never prevented the IAEA from carrying out their activities inside Iran, and they had full access to supervise and to have surveillance over our nuclear facilities. But there was this lack of trust. As a result of the last report by IAEA, the type of the report and the way they prepared the report somehow gave an excuse to the Israeli regime and prepared the ground for their unlawful and unauthorized attack against our nuclear facilities. And even after that, the IAEA failed to condemn these attacks or try to anyway to stop them. And this ran counter to the international law, and this resulted in a widespread lack of trust among the Iranian legislators, and the public opinion here.
So before we move on, I just want to say that is an understatement of the century. Of course, President Pezeshkian is exactly right. There has been a complete eradication of trust between Iran, the Iranian people, and the so-called nuclear inspection agency, the IAEA. But it's worse than that. As I said, it was literally used as a weapon to conduct information intelligence, to assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists, to conduct these strikes, which have caused so much damage to Iran's infrastructure. And the United States was building up the pretext in under the Trump administration, using this kind of narrative to build up, and using negotiations themselves to build up toward this moment, which is not over, by the way, because we know not only is Netanyahu and Trump talking about future green lighting of attacks by Israel on Iran, but we also know that from Donald Trump to Lindsey Graham to the entirety of the U.S. foreign policy establishment, they are still talking about nuclear Iran. Oh, we don't know. It's going to take a few months, years for them to rebuild. But at any point, they can revive this. And what the point of the strike that the U.S. did in the waning days of the so-called 12-day war was not about eradicating anything. It wasn't about preventing the bomb. No, it was about using that pretext as a testing ground for what a strike would look like, and to continue on with the possibilities of using Israel as that primary attack dog to weaken Iran over time, and the U.S. kind of coming in and finishing the job, so to speak, as so many in the U.S.'s foreign policy brass like to say. So this is a dangerous situation indeed.
You've suggested that you were anxious to resolve your conflicts with the United States through diplomacy, and that was derailed by war. Would you be willing to restart diplomacy? And could you tell us in general but precise terms the kind of deal you would be willing to accept?
You see, I am of the belief that we could very much easily resolve our differences and conflicts with the United States through dialogue and talks. And, the international law could serve as the framework or the basis for a deal.
I mean, this is where, look, I'm not familiar with Masoud Pezeshkian's political orientation here. I'm not familiar with his politics. There have been a lot of critics. He's too soft. He's too weak. He doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. Look, he's the president of Iran, and under Operation True Promise 3 and what we saw in that 12-day war, it was quite clear that the leadership of Iran was very disciplined, very much capable of defending themselves. But here, this kind of comment, I think it's naivete. Let's be honest. The idea that the United States and Iran can talk to each other and come to some kind of quote unquote deal is absolute fiction. The United States in this 12-day war completely obliterated any kind of, as Pezeshkian said earlier, trust. But it's worse than that. It's not just the eradication of trust. It's the fact that the U.S. literally bombed Iran, a violation of not only international law that Pezeshkian states here, but an act of war, which only builds on the entirety of the hybrid war against Iran, from the sanctions to the military buildup around it, and of course to the constant incessant PR campaign, which led up to, and of course the intelligence gathering and all of that, all of which led up to these strikes. So Pezeshkian here is saying what a leader needs to say, that wants to so badly and so desperately, to be quite frank, negotiate with the United States to end sanctions. And the only way that any kind of quote unquote deal will ever happen between the US and Iran is if the US is in such a weak position that it has to move away from the conflict theater of West Asia, which, let's be honest, I don't think the US is capable of doing that, given its absolutely rabid imperial lust that it has of this region and how strategic this region is to its overall designs of full spectrum dominance. But that needs to be coupled with Iran having an incredible amount of leverage, which at this time, Iran does have leverage. It has its missile stockpile. It has obviously shown that it can defend itself. But that, I don't believe, is enough to prevent the United States from doing what it has historically done in case after case after case. And we are entering a period where the United States, let's be frank and let's be honest, the United States doesn't really have a stop button. It doesn't have that anymore. And if it ever did, and that's in large part because it is viewing the world as a state of crisis for itself, because the U.S. is losing its influence, it's losing its trust, it's losing its dominance, it's losing its economic power over the globe, and therefore it is completely and utterly reliant on military power. Hence, Iran will continue to be targeted in this way.
The rights of all nations, the Iranian nation, would be respected. But unfortunately, it was Netanyahu that destroyed these diplomacy and these diplomatic efforts. We have always, we never wanted anything beyond the respect for our rights, rightful rights, enshrined in international law. But as I said, it was Netanyahu that brought unrest to our region, and is fomenting unrest and tensions in the region. As I have always said, we have always been after peace. It has been my motto. It has been my belief. It has been my heartfelt opinion that we need to live in peace and harmony during this short and limited time granted to us by God Almighty, to live in peace and tranquility with everybody. And everybody in the world should live like that. But I would also like, on the other hand, to reiterate that our people are capable enough to defend themselves in self-defense during any kind of attack. And I believe that the United States president can very well guide the region and the world to peace and tranquility, or, on the other hand, to lead it to forever wars.
Do you have plans to re-enter negotiations with the United States, with Envoy Steve Witkoff or anyone else? And if not, what do you think will happen?
We see no problem in re-entering the negotiations. But before that, I have to remind you that because of the atrocities by the Zionist regime, by Israel, not just against my country, but in the whole region, we are now facing a crisis. The people are facing a crisis that we need to put it behind ourselves. Our commanders were off duty. They were spending the night at their homes with their families, but they were killed. And this is considered a war crime according to the international law, because they were off duty, as I said. Or our scientists were also killed and assassinated along with their families and their wives and their children. They were also killed. Pregnant women, children, they were killed in the atrocities, in the attacks of the Israeli regime. Just because they wanted to kill one single person, they had to demolish and destroy a whole building. And as a result of this, a lot of innocent people were killed. A lot of people were killed. And as I said, there is this crisis that we have to put it behind ourselves. And there is a condition, there is a provision for the restarting the talks. How are we going to trust the United States again? We re-enter the negotiations, then how can we know for sure that in the middle of the talks, the Israeli regime will not be given the permission again to attack us?
I mean, that's exactly what we have been saying here. That's exactly what we reviewed here, and Pezeshkian said it straight up that any negotiations with the United States will have to be done under the understanding, that there will not be future attacks, that there will not be aggression done, that negotiations won't be used as an excuse to conduct aggression on Iran. But to be quite honest here, and again, we have to just state the facts, there is no possibility of that being the case. There was no possibility of this. Look, Iran has to do what it has to do. Iran is under sanctions. Iran does not want to be under sanctions. Iran does not care about nuclear weapons. It's not trying to build a nuclear weapon. So negotiations are simply a tool to try to extract some kind of concessions as a means to free up the country and free up the people of Iran from the impact of sanctions. That is fair, and I will never condemn Iran for this. But the fact is here, the United States, even before any of this happened, before the 12-day war, before the Trump administration entered office, we should have already known that the United States is not really a trustworthy partner or ally. It cannot be trusted in these talks. Donald Trump himself was the one to tear up the JCPOA. That was the United States' doing. Nuclear agreements, even when it was in existence during the Obama administration, we know that Obama violated the sanctions agreement over and over and over again. And this has been done over and over and over again. The case of DPRK North Korea, for example, in the 1990s, a similar thing. The United States doesn't really sign treaties to abide by them. It doesn't sign anything, agreements to abide by them. The United States, as an empire, looks after itself and its interests, not first and foremost, but only. It only sees any kind of negotiations, any kind of agreements as a tool, as a weapon for its own pursuit of full spectrum dominance. And this is what Iran can continue to expect as it now goes back into the mode of trying to negotiate with the United States to end these sanctions. It also has to be preparing, and I think it is preparing. We've heard reports not only that Iran is arming itself with China's J-10C, the Chengdu fighter jets that were so successful in the Pakistan-India conflict on the Pakistani side, but we also have heard from the Middle East Eye recently that Iran is pursuing and potentially purchasing missile air defense systems from China too. And of course, this signifies a huge shift in the multipolar world where now you have countries arming themselves and participating in defense cooperation toward that end. So big developments. Iran definitely needs to prepare for a long war, and it appears that's exactly what it is doing.
Do you believe the Israeli government tried to assassinate you?
They did try, yes. And they acted accordingly, but they failed. And as a true believer, I believe that it is in the hands of the God Almighty to determine when a person will die or will not die. If he wills, the God Almighty wills, then you can die when you are walking freely in the streets. And but I would like to tell you that I am not afraid of sacrificing myself for in defense of my country, and in safeguarding and defending the sovereignty, the freedom and the independence of my country. I'm willing to give my life, to give blood for that. And nobody here, I mean, none of the government officials is afraid of losing their lives in line of defense. But will it bring security to the region? I mean, bloodshed, more bloodshed, assassination, killing others. Will it bring peace and tranquility and stability to the region?
With respect, can you tell us how you know that you were an assassination target? A week and a half ago, I don't believe I've seen that confirmed anywhere. How are you certain they tried to kill you?
Of course, it was not the U.S. that was behind the attempt.
We know that Israel and the United States collaborating with it just conducted a major decapitation strike on Iran, killing almost all of its major generals in the IRGC, and was actively targeting Israel Katz. No irony there. The so-called defense minister of Israel said straight up that Israel was pursuing Ayatollah Khamenei. And then what did Donald Trump do? As this ceasefire, which is really a cessation of hostilities, came out, he posted a rendition of the Beach Boys' Barbara Ann, or whatever it's called, to the tune of Bomb, 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 Iran. And in it, the lyrics said just verbatim that the Ayatollah is going to be put in a box, aka killed. So the United States and Israel we're literally trying to conduct regime change here. Tucker Carlson should be asking this question, but of course, Pezeshkian here, I don't believe this is correct, actually, but he says that the U.S. wasn't behind this. Let's be honest. There's no way that if the Mossad, if Israeli military forces, if they were conducting a decapitation strike and trying to hunt down Ayatollah Khamenei and Masoud Pezeshkian, that the United States wasn't involved. There's absolutely no possibility of that whatsoever.
It was Israel. I was in a meeting. We were discussing the ways to move forward, but thanks to the intelligence by the spies that they had, they tried to bombard the area that we were holding that meeting, in which we were holding that meeting. But as I told you before, it is God who wills when a person will die and give up his life. And once again, I would like to emphasize that we are not afraid of martyrdom. We are not afraid of sacrificing our lives for our people, for our independence. And I would like to tell you that this imposed war by the Israeli regime resulted in one thing, and that was more solidarity and unity amongst the Iranian people. And it proved yet once again that the Iranian people, no matter where they are in the whole wide world, they do care about their country, about the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of their motherland. And as I said, this brought about more solidarity, and it united us further. Thanks to this act of aggression by the Israeli regime. My proposal is that the U.S. administration should refrain from getting involved in a war that is not its war, that is not America's war. It is Netanyahu's war that is having its devilish machinations for the whole region. It has its own agenda. He has its own agenda, Netanyahu, I mean, inhuman agenda, and that is having forever wars that go on and on and on. And this is my proposal to the United States, not to be fooled by Netanyahu, not to be dragged into this kind of war.
Again, you see the framing here, that Israel is really kind of acting alone and that the United States wasn't involved. Again, that should be taken with a grain of salt. This is about opening up any kind of space to negotiate the sanctions away. I don't believe any of that space exists, but I understand why the Iranian government, why President Pezeshkian would want to explore that in the face of now what was a failed regime change attempt that the U.S., let's be also honest here, to be fair to Pezeshkian, the U.S. and Israel at this point, if they were to conduct another operation like this again anytime soon, they would be doing more damage to themselves than they could do to Iran. Iran has proven, as Pezeshkian said here, that there's solidarity among the Iranian people. Iran has defense capabilities, and those defense capabilities could pound Israel again. I mean, I've heard anywhere between 5% to 25% of Iran's missile stockpile was depleted in that 12 days. So that means Iran has quite a number of options here to continue its Operation True Promise, whatever. If it's 4 next time, whatever they want to call it, it could happen again. And we saw what happened to the Weizmann Institute. We saw what happened to Haifa. We saw what happened to Tel Aviv. We know that the destruction is in the billions for Israel. We know Israel depleted its air defense systems in just 12 days, and it would be even worse the next time around. So again, while Pezeshkian can be criticized, and I understand where the criticisms come from about negotiating with the United States and maybe placing all the blame on Israel is not 100% accurate. But at the same time, I understand the political machinations here and how Iran is actually now talking about this from a position of strength. And I want to commend Pezeshkian here also for acknowledging that Iranians and the Iranian military, the Iranian people, do have the capabilities to defend themselves. And that's a very important point to make.
2 Iranian ayatollahs have issued fatwas against Donald Trump. What does that mean exactly, and what do you think of it?
To the best of my knowledge, they have not issued decrees or fatwas against any individual or against Donald Trump. And first off, it has nothing to do with the Iranian government or to His Eminence, the Supreme Leader of Iran. What they actually meant by the fatwa was in condemnation of an insult to a religion or religious personalities. And they were actually saying that this is deplorable, this is unacceptable. So it was not directed towards the U.S. president or any other individual, and there might be people with their own ideas and opinions, but I can assure you that the meaning of this fatwa should not be construed or considered as a threat against an individual.
Has Iran ever backed an assassination attempt against Donald Trump?
This is actually what Netanyahu is trying to insinuate and to make your people or the president of your country to believe. But this is wrong because Netanyahu, as I said, has its own agenda. It wants to drag the U.S. into forever wars, as I said, and to bring more insecurity, instability, and unrest to the whole region.
There are some large number of Iranian nationals living in the United States. Some have said they are, quote, sleeper cells. They are terrorists who are acting at the command of your government. Would you right now make a statement to Iranian citizens living in the United States not to commit acts of violence in the United States?
You see, these things you're telling me, this is the first time I'm hearing them from you or from anybody. You know, the Iranians are known for their knowledge, for their science, for their courtesy, for being civilized. Have you seen otherwise from them, any other kind of behavior from them, or any violent behavior? Has anybody ever seen anything from them? Yeah, as I said, this is what Israel is trying to put into your minds. They are propagating that Iranians might be capable of doing such a thing, but this is totally untrue because by nature Iranians are pro peace and tranquility, and they're trying to actually make to somehow impact the minds of the decision makers and the people of the United States, and to scare them into getting involved in a war in my region that is not going to ensure any kind of interest for the United States. It is not to be in the interest of the United States to be involved in any kind of war in my region.
Tucker Carlson here, I understand why he should address this and needs to address this, because it's what the mainstream media says all the time. It's what Washington has been purveying and spreading around, this propaganda. But again, this is the fantasy world that the U.S. is forced to live under because the foreign policy establishment and the elites that control it, their interests are so deeply wedded to full spectrum dominance over this region, Iran being the big threat here because of its sovereignty, its role in the multipolar world, its steadfast support for Palestine and the resistance. Iran is persona non grata. It has to be eliminated and eradicated. So, of course, the United States has to make up, of course, the U.S. foreign policy establishment has to make up all kinds of strange tales about Iran. They've done it with Russia. They've done it with China. Propaganda war, atrocity propaganda. But here with Iran, it's completely a fantasy world because you can search all you want. You can try to find all the evidence and reports that you want. You won't be able to find a credible report about some kind of sleeper cell terror attack. And of course, all of the misgivings and talks about assassinations on Trump and attacks on Trump from Iran are all just coming from intelligence sources, likely the CIA, likely the Mossad, likely some one of those 3-letter agencies in the United States that are doing this for the benefit of endless war. So that question itself, I mean, a very easy answer for Pezeshkian, and one that I will say is 100% true in terms of the way that a leader like this, I understand why he is talking the way he is, He wants to sever. Pezeshkian wants to sever that bond that people, Americans, may have still. Maybe some who are watching Tucker Carlson's program of unity and partnership with Israel. He wants the United States, people in the United States, to see Israel as not acting in the benefit of them. So in that respect, that's understandable. On the other hand, of course, I don't necessarily 100% agree with the idea that Israel is dragging the United States into war. The United States has been at war in West Asia for decades upon decades. And it didn't even start with a war on terror. And Iran has deep history and knowledge of that, given that in 1953, the CIA was key working with its British counterparts to overthrowing the government of Iran.
It wasn't that long ago, it was during the revolutionary period in Iran, that Iran had relations with Israel and commercial relations with Israel and reputedly bought weapons from Israel. What happened? How did that change? Who changed it and why, that relationship?
Israel itself is to blame because just look at what they have been doing in the last couple of years in Palestine, in Gaza. What Netanyahu has been doing, killing women and children, bombing schools and hospitals and civilian and residential areas. This is nothing short of a full-scale genocide. There, they have blocked the entry of food and medicine, any kind of humanitarian relief to Gaza. So this has adversely impacted the way my country and the whole region looks at Israel. And this, I mean, their own behavior and their own actions are to blame, because this is unacceptable what they have been doing in my region. And as far as I know, we have never received any kind of a weapon from Israel. And I would like to tell you, even at that time, we did not want to have weapons. We did not want to have wars. We did not want to fight the Iraqis. It was the war that was imposed on us. And just like the way that this war was imposed on us by the Israeli regime, we did not attack Israel. They attacked us.
Can you imagine at the end of the diplomatic exchange with the United States, a world in which American companies invest again in Iran, sanctions are lifted, there is peace in the region? Is that your goal? And do you think it's possible?
You know, from the very beginning of my administration, I first tried to have the domestic solidarity and unity, further unity amongst the Iranian people. Then we tried to have better relations with our neighbors, neighboring countries of Iran. And then I had this talk with His Eminence, the Supreme Leader of Iran, and during which His Eminence emphasized that there is no limitation and there is nothing preventing the U.S. investors to come to Iran and to make investments in Iran, even presently. There has never been any limitation, anything barring them from coming into Iran. And this is the belief of the Supreme Leader of Iran.
This is an important point, right? Iran doesn't place sanctions on the U.S. The U.S. places sanctions on Iran. So really the question is that Tucker Carlson should be asking, and this is my criticism of Tucker Carlson, and I have many criticisms of Tucker Carlson, because I do see the glorification of Tucker Carlson as kind of taking away from the hard work that so many independent analysts and journalists have been doing, traveling to Russia, traveling to the multipolar world, all across it, Iran, China, those building real people-to-people ties, those not only seeking to promote a narrative, promote facts and analysis through that weaves together a narrative against warmongering and against U.S. expansionism, against U.S. imperialism, against U.S. empire, and of course, against Israeli aggression, Zionism, etc. Takes away from their work. And Tucker Carlson, of course, given his stature and his long history as a Fox News journalist and journalist elsewhere, he gets access that others can't. But in this sense here, a lot of times in his interviews, there's a lot of wasted time. And I believe that this question was a waste of time to even ask, because the problem is not with Masoud Pezeshkian, not with the Iranian government, not with Iran. They don't place sanctions on the United States. The U.S. places sanctions on them. The U.S. is starving Iran. The U.S. is trying to starve Iran. It's not succeeding necessarily, but it is trying to cut off and isolate Iran because the overall goal is regime change. So Tucker Carlson should now call up Donald Trump or call up, Steve Witkoff. I know he interviewed Steve Witkoff, but he didn't ask these questions. Hey, you're going to lift sanctions on Iran? No, he didn't say that. Maybe you should lift sanctions on Iran. Why shouldn't you, right? These tough questions don't really get asked. Actually, in the Witkoff interview, a lot of people mentioned, and I couldn't even watch most of it because in the Witkoff interview, Witkoff was just promoting Zionist talking points, and very little of it was being challenged. So Tucker Carlson should take his media stature now and begin asking these very same questions. Hey, let's end sanctions against Iran, right? Let's do that. Why not? What interest does it have? Tucker Carlson is very much against war with Iran, and I commend him for that. But why not go further and say, hey, the best path to peace is to end these sanctions. Sanctions have had this effect against Russia. Tucker Carlson spoke out against his opposition to the war on Russia and the sanctions against Russia. Bring that question to U.S. officials and be just as tough.
Once again, I would like to tell you that it is Israel that does not want such things to happen in the region. Israel does not want to see peace and tranquility in the region. But I would like to once again repeat that the United States President, Mr. Trump, is he's capable enough to guide the region towards the peace and a brighter future and put Israel in its place, or get into a pit, an endless pit or a swamp, and that is a war that Netanyahu wants the United States or the U.S. president to be dragged into. So it is up to the United States president to choose which path that I told you about. And as I told you, there is nothing preventing the commercial or industrial or economic activities by the U.S. Business people and investors. And of course, if there was a limitation, it was caused by the U.S. sanctions, not by us.
Mr. President, my final question: if we wind up in a broader war, could you expect assistance from Russia and China, military and economic assistance from your allies, Russia and China?
We have always put our trust in God, and in God we trust. And we are capable enough to defend ourselves and to stand on our own 2 feet and to defend our country, our territorial integrity to the last drop of our blood. As I have said again and again, we don't want wars. We don't want to develop a nuclear weapon. And this false image, this wrong mentality created in the minds of the U.S. Decision makers and officials is because of the devilish machinations instigated by Netanyahu and the Israeli regime and its policies based on warmongering. And the U.S. president should know that another war will only spread more instability in the Middle East, and it is not going to be in the interest or in favor of the U.S. president or the U.S. government to move in that or towards that direction. They instead need to choose peace and tranquility, which is something that I am and my government and my country are after. And I also, as I said, I believe that the U.S. president is powerful enough to put Israel, to Netanyahu in their place, to contain them and replace warmongering, bloodshed, and conflicts with peace and tranquility.
And he didn't answer that question. Masoud Pezeshkian didn't answer that question. That's understandable in one respect, in that the Western mainstream media, we know that Tucker Carlson was attacked heavily by the Zionist influencers, and the Western mainstream media hasn't looked kindly upon this interview. So it's understandable that President Pezeshkian of Iran would not answer the question affirmative. Yes, Russia and Iran are going to help us, or no, Russia and China are going to help us, or no, Russia and China are not going to help us. Why? Because no matter how he answers that question, there will be major a triggering of a narrative war that will either view that kind of statement, that kind of information as reasons to escalate, reasons to demonize, reasons to elevate a kind of Cold War atmosphere. And it's quite obvious that President Pezeshkian of Iran was more focused on speaking to Americans who might watch that interview. So all of that's understandable. In that sense, though, for my purposes, however, it's important to note that I am fully of the agreement and of admiration of Iran's steadfast sovereignty and self-determination, its orientation toward almost a kind of self-reliant, independent political framework. It's very admirable. And honestly, it's not just admirable, but it's something that Iran had to do given the economic war that has been placed against it and imposed upon it by the United States. However, with all of that said, it is critical, right? And I will never hold back on this. It is critical that Iran, Russia, China, and the rest of the multipolar world continue forward and accelerate this integration and begin preparations on doing so on the military sphere in ways that can be done that won't necessarily trigger a kind of war with the United States. I understand wanting to avoid war with the United States. I understand wanting to ensure stability and to reject bloc mentalities and alliances and all of this. However, this is what the 12-day war showed us and demonstrated to the world is that the United States and Israel, they are not afraid to do the unthinkable, even if it's bad for them, in order to pursue objectives that they see as increasingly out of reach, and therefore increasingly the time that hourglass that the U.S. empire has for itself and the Israeli regime, because these two entities are going downward together. Both of them see this historical moment as critical toward escalation. Therefore, it's going to be important that these nations, these countries, and these development models that they are pursuing, the multipolar model, that strengthens. And it's going to have to be done on the military front. There's no way around it, because that is the primary weapon the U.S. is going to use. And we can talk all day about how the U.S. cannot fight conventional wars against any of these countries, but they will fight all kinds of other ways in all kinds of other ways to make this happen. And that does not dismiss or not. It always includes the nuclear option. So these countries need to cooperate militarily, and that's why I've seen cooperation around things like color revolutions and increasing defense of national sovereignty. And that way is critically important. And Iran now has a huge task ahead of it to do just that. But this interview, just to summarize, this interview was more so about Iran speaking to Americans who watch Tucker Carlson. So the emphasis was trying to break that bond that may still exist in some way, shape, or form for viewers of his show with Israel, to show that Israel is really a spark plug of war against Iran, that regime change against Iran is not in the interest of American people. And in this way, the interview was successful. But where this interview was not necessarily successful on both sides, on Tucker Carlson's side and on the Iranian president's side, was, I believe, in demonstrating the actual situation that we are in. The truth is that the United States is not it's not sitting on the sidelines. It is one that is not capable under Trump or really anyone else of negotiating in good faith and fairly with Iran, because the overall objective is regime change. And this objective is not just some kind of pursuit, some kind of hobby that the U.S. foreign policy establishment is pursuing that it can just turn off and say, well, we'll do something else now. No, it is part of a project of full spectrum dominance that sees the biggest links, the strongest links of the multipolar world system. China with its planned socialist economy, Russia with its heavily centralized and state-directed economy and military. And then we can also say the same for China. And then Iran with its steadfast sovereignty, its commitment to indigenous development, and its capacity to develop itself in ways that both connect to the rest of the world, because Iran has done that. Look at what it's done with China in terms of oil trade for economic development. and then look at what it's done with its ballistic missile program. Look at how it's been able to remain on its feet despite crippling sanctions. All of these speak to big trouble, a big kind of danger for the United States in being able to achieve its objective in that region, which is instability, chaos, and division, which allows for, as we have seen over the centuries, partition and the capacity for the U.S. and its allies here, its military outpost of Israel, to achieve their objectives. The problem here is that now chaos, instability, the divisions that they are wreaking havoc upon the region are blowing back big time. And that's true across the world. So this is a key fact. This is something key to remember, is that Iran here achieved a major victory against both the U.S. and Israel, but that victory is just part one, or we could say, part whatever number in this long history of aggression against Iran. It's another step toward full victory for Iran and the multipolar world, but it has to be seen with extreme caution, given that the United States, until it is arrested in some way, until either internationally or domestically it is arrested by the power of people to develop a different alternative, a new alternative to the rule of rapacious capital and endless war. Until that happens, we're not going to see this regime change operation end. No, in fact, we are in for a regime change war for some time to come, and we need to stay attentive to this. So in effect, Tucker Carlson has done a service by showing that it is critical to get the Iranian side of the story. But in many ways, this interview falls short of showing the reality and the truth of what is going on here. And that is why we had to react to it. And that is why it's important as we move into the next phase of this war to continue to ensure that people understand just what is at stake here. In many ways, what is at stake is not only development, not only the ability for people to live in harmony and prosperity and to end scourges of the world like poverty, like war, to end that kind of exploitation, but also human existence itself in many respects.